Good evening, everybody. Welcome to this rather interesting episode of Meeting of the Minds. I still go by the name of Dorian's Grave. Some people still call me Michael, and that's okay. So why am I standing here, you might ask, as opposed to sitting down in a normal chair and having a normal conversation, or about to, at least? Well, it just so happens that for the last 1.5 years, we've been doing back-to-back episodes of Meeting of the Minds, and we've had so many tremendous guests visit the platform. And it's been great, it's been enlightening, it's been fantastic. But we also realize that for you to really move a culture forward, you need to be able to expand. And when you're expanding, that really means just giving the power to the people. Let them decide what kind of conversations they want to have, decide what kind of guests they want to bring to the platform, and then you give them full room and space to speak their minds freely and air or touch on the topics they want to talk about. To further emphasize this, in the room today, we have two people who are going to have a conversation. They've actually both chosen and decided they're going to speak about. So Dora Poni Loro from South Sudan is going to be moderating this conversation today, and she'll be in conversation with Malgorzata Agnieszka Cyndecka from Poland to talk about the abortion clause that were induced in their society, in Poland, of course, not too long ago. And now this has raised so many eyebrows in society, and how a lot of people don't agree with it. And quite frankly, I don't neither. They were talking about that. They were talking about women's rights all over the world in general, too. So this should be an interesting conversation, moderated by Dora, and also in conversation with Malgorzata. You can be part of the conversation if you're watching this from YouTube. There should be a QR code on your screen. And if you don't have that, you could just go into a website called Slido. If you go to Google and you type in Slido, it will come up. And when you go there, you just type in MoftMinds. And then you're automatically part of the conversation. And you can ask the questions you want to the panel or the people having a conversation in the room. For those in the room today, you can also do the same. If you have any questions, you go into Slido on Google, and then you can pose your questions to the speakers today, and they shall try to answer your question. It's pretty simple. The code in the box is MoftMinds. Well, that's my super intro. On behalf of myself and Literature House, I just wanted to say thank you very much for being there for us, for being there for me. It's been an interesting ride, great rides. I'm still here, but in another capacity now. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to open the floor and have this conversation with Malgorzata and Dora. Have a good one.
Thank you so much, Michael. Thank you for offering the space for us today. I and Malgorzata are very happy to be here. It's very great to meet you, Malgorzata, and to have this important conversation. It's great that the topic is My Body, My Call, and it's actually an important topic because I've met you before talking about this topic, Malgorzata, and it really kind of raised some eyebrows, and it really touched me in a deeper way, knowing that many women across the world, not only in Poland, Poland is so close to us, living in Norway now, and that got me to think that, yeah, it would be good to have you here and have a conversation with you and get the audience also to be a part of this conversation. So thank you so much for coming in. My name is Dora Poni Loro. I'm a social worker and an activist. I stand for love, dignity, and full potential for myself and others. I'm very passionate about women's rights, about youth empowerment, and about many of the social problems that are related to migration, related to restriction of rights, and now especially like women's rights and other rights that are important, are basic human rights, but get restricted because of different cultural norms, religious and political ideologies. So I'm really happy to have you here, and I really want you also to introduce yourself for the audience to know who you are and why you are here today.
Thank you so much, Dora. Thank you for inviting me today, and thank you, Michael, for inviting me. Since it's a very, very important topic, and I think that we cannot just avoid talking about this topic because we sometimes we think that it doesn't concern us, but it actually does. My name is Malgorzata Cyndecka. I'm associate professor at the law faculty, and I work with EU-EA law. And I'm also a member of the International Commission of Jurists, the Norwegian section. And right now I have a pleasure to be a leader for a section that deals specifically with EU-EA law. As I said, as you mentioned, I'm very engaged, or I'm really engaged in a discussion on women's rights, and this is basically because I'm a woman, and I'm also Polish, and that's why what is happening in Poland is extremely important to me. So thank you once again for inviting me.
Thank you. And as you've said, you've really engaged yourself lately in regards to the new abortion laws in Poland. You've written an article recently in Class Campaign, and you have brought to the attention of the Norwegian audience, and not only here, but you have spoken about Isabel, the woman who lost her life because the doctors could not carry out an abortion due to the laws that were there. So please tell us about the laws that the ban on abortion and its consequences on women, and especially in Isabel's case. And what is the status really of women in Poland right now, the reproductive health and the care that they are given or they have the right for?
Maybe I will start with saying something more about the new law on abortion. The law on abortion in Poland was changed after it was over, the communism was over in Poland. So in early 90s, we changed our law. So as abortion in Poland was legal only in 3 cases. So first of all, that was the case when the fetus had very serious malfunctions. There was a serious disease, and there was a serious risk that the fetus would not survive the pregnancy, or it would just die quite soon after the birth. The second exception concerns a situation when the pregnancy is a risk to woman's life or health. And the third exception concerns criminal acts. And the result of such acts is pregnancy. So that's mainly rape. And what happened last year on the 22nd of October was a judgment from the Constitutional Tribunal, which is no longer an independent tribunal in Poland, because as some of you know, the governing party, Law and Justice, they are trying to take over the judicial system, and they want to have all the judges subordinated to their wishes. So the Constitutional Tribunal was captured, and since then it's just doing what the governing party intends to do. The discussion on abortion in Poland is nothing new. So of course there were always voices in favor of liberalizing the law and against, but there was no majority in favor of restricting the law on abortion. So what the government did, while being pressed by the Catholic Church, is that they didn't have the majority in the parliament to have the new law on abortion. So they decided to ask the Constitutional Tribunal, who has as its task to decide whether laws in Poland are in accordance with the Polish constitution. They decided to ask the tribunal whether the law on abortion was in accordance with the Polish constitution. And surprise, surprise, what they said was that no. One of the exceptions, the exception that concerns the fetus, its health, that was removed from the law. So even though originally the discussion was supposed to be about mainly Down syndrome, the Constitutional Tribunal decided to remove the exception totally. So the reality is that even though the fetus has no brain, or the brain is outside the skull of the fetus, because that's what happens, or the fetus has a certain syndrome which results in just having one eye instead of two. Those are horrible details. I'm sorry to say, to tell you all this, but that's the reality. It happens. So even though we have such cases, it's no longer possible to have a legal abortion in Poland. And it's not only about the fetus being in such a state that, well, it's not going to be a normal baby when it's born. Such a fetus has very often no chances to survive the pregnancy, and any minute it may just die any minute, which creates a serious risk to woman's life, because what may happen is the sepsis. Meaning that we will have a situation that the woman may just die because, I mean, you're going around with a dead body inside your body, to put it very simply. And this is what happened with Izabela, a 30-year-old Polish woman. She was in her 22nd week of pregnancy, and suddenly water broke. So she immediately went to the hospital. And when you are pregnant in 22nd week, the fetus has no possibility to survive if water broke, because the fetus has no lungs at that time. So it breathes only because there is water inside your belly, to put it very, very simply. So it was very clear that the fetus has no chances to survive. In addition to that, we know that it was confirmed earlier that the fetus had serious malfunctions. But of course, Izabela couldn't have a legal abortion in Poland anymore. What the doctors were afraid of was that if they decided to carry out an abortion, they would be threatened by the Polish authorities, because then it would be an illegal abortion. The question is, what can you do in such a situation? You can, if you still remember the exceptions that still exist in the law on abortion, you have still this exception that if the pregnancy is a risk to woman's life or health, then the abortion would be legal. The problem is that you actually may have very serious problems with proving that at a certain point in time it is a risk to a woman's life or health. And sepsis is not something like maths. It's not like 2 and 2 is 4. The condition of the patient changes very, very fast. So what the doctors did, instead of risking to be charged with illegal abortion, which may result in 3 years in prison, they decided to wait until fetus heart stopped beating. Of course, nobody was thinking about Izabela's heart that was still beating. That was not important. That was not the case. That should be taken into consideration. So they waited and they waited. Izabela was extremely scared. We know that because she was sending text messages to her mother. She was writing that the fever was just higher and higher. At some point, she had 40 degrees. From that point, she was not able to write anymore. She was also saying the doctors cannot do anything because of the new judgment of the Constitutional Tribunal. They are just afraid. They will be waiting until the fetus' heart is beating. And she was also aware of the fact that the fetus is dying, is slowly dying in her belly because it has no lungs. So that was also another type of torture she was experiencing at that moment. Isabella had a daughter, a small daughter that was waiting for her at home. And she knew that if she gets sepsis, then it's highly probable that she will not make it. And she didn't make it, because within 24 hours, the fetus died, and then the doctors could start acting, but it was too late. And we know about this case only because her family decided to tell the media about what happened, and the family's lawyer decided to inform the public about the situation. And of course, right now we have a discussion about who's to blame. And it suits very well to all of those who are extremely pro-life and who are in favor of this new law on abortion to say that, well, it's obvious that it's the doctors. They waited too long. The reality is that Polish doctors are extremely scared of doing anything right now. And they're under extreme pressure. What I would like to mention in this regard is the fact that when a constitutional tribunal hands down a judgment, this judgment has to be published by the government. And it is considered that it is from the publication that the judgment enters into force. Until it's not published, it's not in force. So the judgment was handed down on the 22nd of October 2020, but it was published in January next year, on the 27th of January. What happened is that within this period, until the judgment was officially in force, police was already investigating abortions in Polish hospitals, even though those abortions were legal at that point of time. So, of course, the idea behind was to give a very clear message to Polish doctors. Abortion is supposed to be illegal in Poland. If you do something, we have measures to take care of you. So it's not so strange that they are extremely afraid. Some of them are saying very openly that, well, I'm afraid of doing anything because my colleagues can inform the police. So what they are thinking about is like having everything on paper to have a confirmation that what they did was perfectly legal. They are not thinking about patients anymore. So this is a nightmare that is actually happening every single day in Polish hospitals. And as I said, we know about Isabella only because she died, and this case was made public. After her death, there were many more women writing and saying openly about exactly the same cases. So we have, for example, cases of women who experience something which is called an ectopic pregnancy, which means that the fertilized egg does not establish itself in the womb, but outside the womb, usually in a fallopian tube. And of course, this pregnancy has no possibility to develop into a fetus and then a baby. So what you risk is that at some point it will just explode in your belly. And then you might just bleed out. So you're actually going around with a ticking bomb. And everyone knows that. But the doctors are not carrying out abortions. What they do is like they say to their patients that they have to wait. And we have cases of women that, well, they were forced to wait, and then of course it in a way exploded. They were bleeding out. They were saved. But some part of the fallopian tube had to be removed, so some of them will never get pregnant again. So this is another dimension of this case, well, that's a nightmare that is happening all the time, and even though Isabella's case, it's not decided, because right now we have an investigation, and of course nobody is going to say that, well, that was the doctor or it was not the doctor that was guilty. This has to be verified, but we know what is happening in Polish hospitals, and some of doctors, they are. Even though who were extremely against the law, they are saying very openly that if I decide to save a single woman and end up in prison, I will not have a possibility to help other women. It sounds absurd that you have to have such priorities.
And just got me wondering about the foster diagnosis, when they diagnose and they find out that the fetus having some serious malformations and stuff like that. So it's, as a doctor, kind of conveying the message to a woman, knowing that the child will not maybe survive, and then having to wait with that child until it's born or not born. How do women who kind of decide to maybe move to other countries to abort, how are they received when they get back, and what are the consequences of that?
Yes, luckily we have a few organizations, women's organizations, who are helping such women. Mm-hmm. So those organizations are, first of all, fighting for women's rights in Polish hospitals, but in many cases you cannot just wait. You have no time. You just have to take actions, because otherwise the woman will die until you get some action from the hospital. So they are helping women to go abroad and to have abortion in Germany, in the Czech Republic, in the UK. So it happens. It happens all the time. And of course it's like an extra trauma for all those women, because we cannot think that all those pregnancies are like, well, teenage girls who have no idea about contraception and they just got pregnant while being drunk. And even if they got pregnant in this way, they still have right to decide what's going to happen with their body. But it's not like that. In many cases, those pregnancies are pregnancies that were really awaited. And it's one tragedy when you find out that the fetus is not going to make it. And then the second message is that, well, you just have to wait while carrying it around, and maybe you will die. But actually, who cares? Somebody else decided that that's the right thing. You have no right to decide about your body. So this is a real torture we are talking about. And you may have children from before, and those children are risking to lose their mother. Of course, nobody is thinking about that, because the most important thing is to make sure that the fetus rights are respected.
Yeah, that's really, as you put it, it's a nightmare, not only for the women, but all girls growing up, for the whole families. And it's now we're focusing on Poland, of course, but it is, as we talk about it right now, we are also speaking on behalf of all the other women out there who are also, whose reproductive rights have been restricted due to different politics or religious, cultural ideologies. And there are many voices out there, like your voice, Malgorzata, trying to fight for these women and trying to be the voice for the voiceless. Who are those powerful voices supporting these laws in Poland? And how do advocates like you and others who are speaking out been looked at, and what are the consequences of you speaking out so loudly here right now, and when you have to travel to Poland next time, and what consequences do you face as an advocate for women's rights?
Well, when it comes to those powerful voices that are in favor of this new law, that's first and foremost the Catholic Church. And what I notice is that when I speak about the Catholic Church, usually we think about the Catholic Church in general. But we are not talking about the Catholic Church in general, because as I received one of the comments after my article in Klassekampen, the Catholic Church is not against denying abortion when woman's life is at risk. And I may agree with that, but it's not the case in Poland. It's not the case with the Polish Catholic Church. The Polish Catholic Church, I could be very sarcastic and say that it's more Catholic than the Catholic Church, because we have, for example, a very strong opposition towards the Pope. So it's not only the Polish bishops and archbishops that do not agree with the Pope and what the Pope is saying. It's also no ordinary people. It's the Catholic Church that is calling LGBT people an ideology. They compare it to Nazism, they compare it to communism, they compare it to the worst plague that has to be removed from Poland. And it's the Catholic Church that was extremely in favor of prohibiting abortion. Right now we have a new law proposal that says that abortion will be totally prohibited in Poland. So even if you get raped, you will have to give birth following that rape. And the Catholic Church is supporting that. So they want to make all Polish women martyrs, to put it in this way. And the politicians, the governing party, their voters are extremely Catholic, or at least Catholic as they understand what the Catholic Church is saying. So I wouldn't really say that it's something that Jesus was preaching about, but I'm no expert, so still. But those are the ones that are behind this new law. And the bishops and archbishops were giving their thanks to the government, the Constitutional Tribunal, when the new law entered into force. I have not heard one word from any bishop or archbishop after Isabella's death. Not a word. But this only proves how much woman's life is worth in Poland. And of course, all activists that are speaking openly about this horrible injustice, about this discrimination, they are enemies of the government, they are enemies of the Catholic Church. And of course, Polish women were not sitting quietly after the judgment of the Constitutional Tribunal, after the judgment entered into force. We had huge protests. And the government was even playing with this judgment in this way that they chose the date to publish the judgment in the middle of coronavirus, because they didn't want women to get out in the streets and protest. Of course, they did got out, obviously. But then we met with police, which is extremely brutal against women. It's gas. It's policemen were beating them up. I mean, they are really willing to beat up women while they are not doing so well when it comes to, for example, hooligans. then you cannot really see police taking any actions. So being an activist is extremely risky in Poland. So, and it's not only being called names in social media, but it's also being sued by different organizations that are sponsored by those who are promoting this new law. So it's, I would say that it's really risky and definitely not very pleasant. What is quite optimistic is that it seems that the Polish society is actually in favor of liberalizing the law on abortion. But right now we have this judgment from the Constitutional Tribunal, and it says that it was in contravention with the Polish Constitution. So I really don't see how we can actually change this situation, because we cannot change the situation with breaching the law again, actually. We cannot use the same measures, even though if we look at the Polish Constitution, what the Constitutional Tribunal did was a misuse of the Polish Constitution. Because the Constitution does not say that the life is sacred. From the point in time when the egg is fertilized. It doesn't say so. And it doesn't say that the fetus rights are more important than women's rights. The Constitution says that rights have to be balanced. So they interpreted the Constitution as it suited them at that point in time. So that also has to be said.
Has there been some pressure kind of from the outside world on that, and how is the Polish government reacting to that?
There is some pressure. I mean, we have, for example, the European Parliament adopting resolutions pretty much saying that you cannot adopt a law that is killing women. You cannot make abortion illegal when the result is that you are basically killing women, but of course it has absolutely no impact on the Polish government. And of course the situation when it comes to the relation between the EU and Polish authorities, it's quite tense. So such resolutions, they are being taken as a provocation. So nobody's going to tell Polish government what is best, right? It's stay away from our women, stay away from our laws. That's their message.
The last time we had a conversation after you had that panel discussion, we talked about sex education in the school and how students are not being given that. Could you just say something about that?
Yes, certainly. I think, it would be logical to assume that if you have a very strict law on abortion, because you want to avoid having abortions in your country and you take care of family, you would try to have a very good sexual education. To make women aware of their bodies and make sure that they don't need abortion. It's not the case in Poland. I think it's fair to say that the sexual education does not exist in schools at all. This education is very often being given by priests of the Catholic Church. So you can imagine what those poor children hear from the priests, or from persons that are educated in different institutions that are sponsored by the Catholic Church. And I can give you some examples. What was recently being written in one of Polish newspapers. I think that were like some students that they just informed their parents what they are actually hearing during those classes. So one priest was saying that, girls that are using tampons, those are not decent girls, because there are the ones that definitely need to have something inside all the time, right? So that's one comment about a very obvious thing, like taking care of hygiene while you have your period. There are some other absurd comments, like about souls that are kept in a condom and such things. And you may laugh at that because it sounds pretty absurd. But well, even though it's a while since I was 14 or 15, and I went to primary school or secondary school, but I still remember such comments. So it's nothing new, actually, what Polish children hear during such classes in schools, and it's really scary that it's still out there. So children and teenagers, they have absolutely no idea about what is happening with their bodies. They have no idea how they may get pregnant. Then they are, of course, scared one day to get pregnant. So nobody seems to care. There was even a law proposal saying that those who are trying to educate children will be sent to prison, because that would be considered a criminal act. You were supposedly sexualizing children. Simply telling them that, well, girls at some point they will have a menstruation, and this means that you can get pregnant, and so on. And one more thing I recently became aware of is that you have this great vaccine against HPV virus, which really saves lives. And as I recently read, it's extremely difficult to get this vaccine in Poland. It's not forbidden, but it's extremely, extremely expensive, and very often you just cannot get it. It's not available. Why? Because the Catholic Church said that if we vaccinate girls against this virus, what they will do? Well, they will just get out in the streets and have sex, right? That's the logic behind this policy. So once again, nobody cares about girls' lives, about women's lives.
Wow. Oh, that's powerful. And this vaccine you talk about, it's been offered to girls here at school already, and it's one of these mandatory vaccines that girls should have. Wow. No, it again shows the restrictions, as we talk about, on provision of basic health care to women. And we see it globally, and especially now in the pandemic time, when access to health care is being really even neglected because other health issues come up. And like over centuries, that has been the case, where women's health, and especially reproductive health care, has not been prioritized. We see it really. And this shows that the importance of advocating, the importance of activism in regards to these issues of women's reproductive health. And healthcare is actually, it's key to women's well-being and economic stability. We see that across the world. As you mentioned, with this sexual education for young girls is really important. We have just heard in the news not long ago about the Bolivian 11-year-old who was raped by a family member, got pregnant, and she could not abort the child because that was against the law. And it's been a lot of activism around that. And we see again in the COVID times where young girls have been either gotten pregnant because they are out of school for 1 year, 2 years, and they don't get access to health care, prevention, contraceptives, because again of the restrictions that are there. So we see this tendency around the world, not only in Poland, in Norway we see there's been also some restrictions on the abortion laws. So it's a global issue that women are fighting for. And according to, let me just read some statistics from World Health Organization, they say approximately 800 women and 6,700 babies lose their lives around the time of childbirth. And in addition to that, nearly 5,400 babies are stillborn daily, with 40% of those deaths occurring in relation to labor and childbirth. And these are huge numbers. And most of the stillbirths, maternal and newborn deaths and harm, they are avoidable if there should be provision of safe, respectful, and quality healthcare during pregnancy. We see also that more than 200 million women annually are estimated to life-threatening complications in connection to pregnancy, often leading to serious disability. And lack of access to family planning, that's also one of the major causes to pregnancies that are also with complications, and with young girls who get pregnant when the body is not ready to conceive a child, and then you either give birth to a baby and then you get complications like fistula or stillbirth, or even lose your life as a child because your body is not capable of carrying a child. So these are some of the issues that we see around the world, and it's really threatening women's life. So Malgorzata, hopefully people are now informed a bit about what's happening in Poland and a little bit of what's happening around the world about the status of women in other parts of the world. Apart from liking articles that we find on the social media or newspapers, either we like or dislike them, or we kind of express our remorse about it. How can people who are listening now here and people who are watching us what can they do in their various capacities and place of influence? Some people are in places where they can change policies. What can they do apart from just listening to us, liking, or maybe not even reading because it's been too much now? They don't want to read it and they don't want to spoil their weekend. It's Friday, today it's weekend. I don't want to listen to this and spoil my weekend. What could they do? Because each and every one of us has a responsibility to change things, to transform lives. Yeah, what would you...
Before I say something about that, just a little comment to what you said about the access to medical help and so on. And of course, Poland is not the only country where such things happen, and I'm really aware of the fact that there are many other places where the situation is even much worse. What I would like to mention, is that right now the situation in Poland is that, exactly as you said, you cannot save lives, even though you have doctors, and those are extremely well educated. You have equipment. You have hospitals, you have capacity. You cannot help those women because some priests said so, because the government said so, because some members of the parliament said so, because some judges of the illegal constitutional tribunal said so. And we can't even help those fetus who can be saved. Because before this judgment, we had the so-called prenatal medicine on a very, very high level. And this is something which I would really call like a miracle branch of medicine, meaning that you can not only diagnose a fetus, but you can help it in many cases. You can perform a surgery on the fetus while it's still in the mother's womb. Right now, we see this branch of medicine dying. Why? Because first of all, what's the point of having any checks? If you find out that something is seriously wrong, what's the point of telling the mother? She will have to give birth in any case, right? And even if you find out that, well, it would be possible to perform a surgery because, for example, there is some kind of, well, let's say, heart condition, many doctors say that they are afraid because if something goes wrong, that's going to be an illegal abortion again, right? So what's the point? So that's something that is extremely frustrating. And how can we help? Well, we have those organizations, women's organizations in Poland, like Federa. And if you want to find out what you can do, like take some concrete actions, you can go on their website and find out how to help. But what is also important is to try to have an impact on the Norwegian government. Because in this respect, we have to mention that Norway is sending millions of euro to Polish authorities. And that's the so-called EA grants or Norway grants. And this is money that Norway is paying because of having access to the EU internal market. Some part of this money goes to Poland, and actually Poland is the country that benefits most. And this money goes to different projects. Still, most of the money, over 90%, is controlled by the government, by the Polish government, and then we risk a lot of corruption, which was recently proved by other authorities that are still independent in Poland. So even though we see that the Polish government is breaching human rights because, well, obviously women's rights are human rights, but it seems that some keep forgetting it. The Polish government is acting against democracy, is breaching the rule of law all the time. Still, the Norwegian government closes its eyes and sends the money to Poland. Yes, as a kind of reward, maybe. So recently we had a discussion in the Norwegian parliament, but the Minister of Foreign Affairs still considers it's completely fine to grant this money to the Polish authorities. So what could be done is to talk about this. Right now there are more and more articles about those funds that are being sent to Poland. And yes, at some point the Norwegian government stopped sending money because of those so-called LGBT-free zones. The money was stopped. The result was very, very obvious, and we got the results almost immediately, because when it comes to money, then it changes the whole situation. Those declarations were taken back immediately. So it is possible to have some impact on what is going on in Poland. It's the lack of political will of the Norwegian government.
So some sanctions might help.
Yes, that's definitely. And it's not even a sanction. It's, I mean, you have no obligation to send money to Poland, because sending those money to Poland is based on the EA agreement, which speaks about democracy, human rights, rule of law. It doesn't exist anymore.
So it's paying for something that's not been practiced yet.
Right. So it's pretty obvious, I would say, but not to everyone.
Thank you so much. That was good. And I think also, as you said, supporting those organizations that are working, you can support it anyway. Find them out and support the activists that are fighting for the cause of women. And also, I think now that the 25th of November is actually the day of the elimination of violence against women. So all of you who are listening, who are watching us, you should do something on that day. From the 25th of November, we're starting 16 days of activism on the elimination of violence against women. So you can either dress in orange to show that you are against violence on women, and you can also contribute in any way, either by writing something on this topic or sharing your comments, and also supporting those organizations out there. So I think we could take some questions from the audience. I haven't seen any questions in the Slido, so we can open up for some questions. Have you? Yeah, this one, great.
Can we have the microphone on, please?
Yeah.
Thank you for a really important topic that you put so well for us. And I was wondering, when it comes to access to birth control, is it easy to get birth control pills without a prescription, or the emergency pill, for instance?
Yes, emergency pill. That's a very good example. In Norway, you can buy it in a pharmacy, right? In Poland, you have to get a prescription from a doctor. And then it's not only that you have to have a prescription, which means that you have to have an appointment. Many doctors decided that it's against their views that you will get an emergency pill. So also finding a doctor that will give you the prescription, that's a little miracle. So right now we have, thanks to those organizations, we have a kind of a list of doctors that where you know that, okay, they are going to give you the prescription. But in small towns, that might be a challenge. And it's not even that, okay, you found a doctor, you got the prescription, you have the money, because an emergency pill is also extremely expensive in Poland. You have to find a pharmacy that will sell you the emergency pill. And that might be also a problem, because also those who work there have right to deny you the pill. So you see, the situation is just it's just horrible, right? And I keep hearing from those who are against the emergency pill that Polish teenagers are eating those pills like Skittles or any other candies, which is, of course, it's not even possible, right, given all those hindrances. So yes, that's also that's also part of the problem.
There's one other question here. It's like, why do people don't like to talk about abortion?
Maybe they think that it doesn't concern them. Maybe they have some bad experiences. I mean, it's not a pleasant topic at all. And it's, in my opinion, abortion should be every woman's choice. It's not about encouraging to having an abortion. But if you are against abortion, simply don't have one, I would say. It's as simple as that. It should be the woman's choice. And what she decides, that should be respected. Because a lot of women are really ready to sacrifice their health, their life, for the sake of the fetus, of the baby. They do a lot. And it's very often a tragedy if they have to make the decision to have an abortion. Because, for example, they may die while they have other children at home. And maybe they are a single parent. So nobody has right to decide for the woman. Still, you can, of course, discuss to which point in time it should be legal to have an abortion. And that's, of course, something that should be discussed, certainly. But still, it should be a woman's choice as a rule. Nobody else has right to make this choice.
I totally agree with you, and I think also it has to do with the openness of talking about it, starting with sexual education, because when we don't talk about contraceptives, when we don't talk about sexual education, then it's not that we, the young people or wherever, we see cases where people get pregnant, and because abortion is not legal, people do it anyway, and it ends up with consequences where people die, and many cases where we've seen that unsafe abortions have been carried out, and it ended up with people losing their lives and children also being killed in that. So it's a thing of having the openness to talk about it, and then the person concerned takes the decision whether to do it or not. And then if the law allows it as well.
Absolutely, because if you cannot think that if you ban abortion, there won't be any abortion. That's an absurd. But it seems that some some believe that.
Absolutely. Any other questions? Remarks? Yeah. Yes, Malgorzata, I think you've touched on a lot of really important things. Some I haven't really reflected about. I've heard you talk, I've read your article, and I think you've made us aware of what is going on in Poland. And I think we have also been made aware that women's right is human rights, and it's our duty to fight it collectively, to address it, and to talk about it. Abortion is a controversial topic to talk about, and you might also experience some kind of tension when talking about it, and some people not maybe responding the way they should, or people are against it. But we should take these tough talks and talk about them, because if we don't talk about them, then we don't really address them in the way they should. And I think, Malgorzata, you're really doing a lot in that. And in regards to speaking out, like in the public, and writing these articles, and even coming here, this evening to voice it. And I hope the audience out there are listening to this, and will be able to take it further. So I thank you so much for this deep conversation, and for speaking on behalf of the thousands of women out there, not only in Poland, as I said, but also across the globe. And I also thank Michael for opening up this space, and after you talking about all the topics, and we starting on this very important topic. So I would give you, Malgorzata, your last remark to just talk to the audience out there, talk to us, and what should we do from tomorrow further, in regards to this topic.
Thank you so much once again for inviting me. And well, I think that if I have an opportunity to say something about this issue, I have an obligation to do so. Mm-hmm. So what I do is extremely little, I would say, and the heroes in this case are all those women who are in a horrible situation, and their families, like this little girl that lost her mother. Recently, one of the newspapers published this girl's letter to her mother. So of course, everything is just heartbreaking what is happening. So I would strongly encourage to be aware of the situation in Poland and what is actually happening, because it's maybe easier to think that such things happen far away from Europe, but it's happening in Poland. And it's going to be worse if this new law on abortion is going to be adopted. And it seems that there might be chances for that. So, and one of the recent actions taken by the government is, for example, making it much more difficult to have a divorce in Poland. It's going to be more costly to have a divorce, and in Poland, it's the court that decides whether you can get a divorce or not. So the whole procedure is going to be longer. So women will have one more law against themselves, because it's usually women that are trying to get out of a marriage because of violence or other issues. So it's just getting worse, actually. I'm afraid.
Here's another question we just got in. Yeah, so that's nice. When it comes to the money Norway sends to Poland, is it mandatory for Norway to do so because of the EU?
No, it's not. It's absolutely not. Because, as I said, sending the money is based on the EEA agreement, and the money is being sent because Norway is a part of the internal market. And the idea behind sending the money to Poland and other member states in the EU is to strengthen democracy, rule of law, human rights. So all those values that Norway is, of course, supporting so much. So that's the idea behind the money. So Poland is not, it's preaching the EEA agreement, just like it's breaching the EU law constantly, and the authorities, they are not thinking about doing anything otherwise. So it's just going in one direction. So what we could do, I mean, Norway, is at least not to support the propaganda that is also against women and other groups, like, for example, LGBT minority. So that's at least at this could we do, like, to be decent, I would say.
Thank you so much. And yeah.
I actually have a question. Before we let you go, because you're both very powerful voices in our community, obviously, and culture shifters, I want to know, where can we find you to read your articles and to follow up on what you're doing? I think it's important for us, people watching and people in the crowd, maybe to follow up on this before we let you go.
Well, I don't have a special. I don't have a special channel. Well, I try to speak up when I have an opportunity. So right now, as I mentioned, I'm really engaged in this Norwegian section of the International Commission of Jurists. That is very focused on stopping sending the Norwegian crowns to the Polish authorities. And I consider the case of women's rights as one of the reasons why we should stop sending the money. So I will definitely continue my work there. And of course, if I have an opportunity, I will publish and send articles, as long as they get accepted by the newspapers. So yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
What about you, Dora? Where do we find you?
Yes, you'll find me on LinkedIn, on Facebook. That's where I am actively advocating and doing my activism there. Thank you.
Is it?
Yeah. So.
Yeah, sorry for taking a while I was trying to think on a way to ask the question in a better way, but I hope it's understandable, because I was thinking about many things you were saying, and many of them are quite similar in Brazil, which is where I come from. So the laws are quite similar when you're describing the conditions where you cannot or can do the abortion. I have people in my family that had to go through. They end up being able to do it, but then they had to face also social attack and from church as well. And then I was just trying to figure out a way to understand, maybe you have a better answer to that, where Poland maybe is different than Brazil, because Brazil is quite religious country as well, in general, and many different religions, but still quite religious. And what do you think is different in Poland that is walking even further towards a more conservative society in many different ways, not just towards women, but in general?
Well, what is happening with the rights of the sexual minorities is horrible, because even though, as I mentioned, those shameful declarations adopted by some municipalities, actually over 100 municipalities that declare themselves LGBT-free zones, they are mostly taken back. So that's a good thing, but only because the EEA money were stopped and the EU money were stopped. So the European Commission followed Norway on this point. Still, right now we have a new law, or at least a proposal for a new law, that will totally forbid, for example, Pride, or, as the law says, any events that are promoting homosexualism. So even talking about that we have some other sexual orientations would be illegal. Informing about that, I mean, who's promoting that? I mean, is anyone forced to change their sexual orientation? I haven't noticed. At least I did not. So the situation is not getting better, They are just finding other ways to restrict the rights of LGBT minority. And we are talking about women, but we should also mention children. Because what the government is saying is that we don't consider women as the subject that should have rights. It's the family that is supposed to have rights. So we are considering rights and freedoms with respect to the family. So as long as you consider yourself a part of a family, that's okay. If not, we don't care. So I would like to mention a project that one of the universities in Norway is engaged in. That's the university in Stavanger. They entered an agreement with something which is called the Institute of Justice. That's an institution that is totally subordinated to the Minister of Justice, that is behind all those legal reforms making judges subordinated. And this institute has a project, a research project concerning violence in domestic relations. And the whole project is supposedly based on the Istanbul Convention that concerns violence against women. The problem is that the agreement refers to Article 7 that speaks about the violence against women. The Institute of Justice is talking about violence in domestic relations, thinking about the violence in family. And the reasons, according to them, the reasons why we have violence is alcoholism, feminism, prostitution. It has nothing to do with, for example, gender, because actually gender is something almost illegal in Poland. The Polish government is behaving in such an absurd way that they were blocking certain legal acts in the European Union that were mentioning word gender. So it's like really getting insane to some extent. So when I discovered this agreement between the University of Stavanger and the Institute of Justice, I was like, I'm still like angry when I'm talking about this, and it was several months ago. So what I did, I informed one of the leading newspapers in Norway, Morgenbladet. They contacted the university. They had no idea what was going on. It seemed that they didn't even read the article in the Istanbul Convention that is referring to the project. They had no idea what it's about, that it's about family rights and it's not longer about women's rights. And the Polish government is working towards abandoning the Istanbul Convention. So what they are planning is to do the same what Turkey is trying to do. We don't need the Istanbul Convention, right? We don't have any violence against women in Poland, so we don't have any problems of this type. So it's extremely risky to engage in any cooperation with the Polish authorities, because even if you have something on paper which looks really great, when you start digging into it, when you start understanding the context, then you really discover how nasty this really is. So I actually don't blame the University of Stavanger, because one of the questions I got from the journalists I spoke to was that, okay, but do you think that the university should be like smarter than the Norwegian government that actually agreed to using this money for this type of research projects? And that was an extremely good question. And actually I think that no, University of Stavanger shouldn't be smarter. It's the responsibility of the Norwegian government to know who they are sending the money to. So I really think that those researchers from the University of Stavanger were put in a horrible position. So yes, that's only like one part of the problem, and then you understand that things get really nasty at some point. So you can no longer assume that there are some good intentions in cooperating, even when it comes to research projects. I mean, you could expect that, okay, how can you manipulate research projects that should serve humanity, all of us, right? both the Polish society and the Norwegian society, but then it turns out that you don't have control over the money you are sending to Poland.
Wow. Oh, it's so important to have you in your voice. I saw the article this morning, the one in regards to the Stavanger University. Yeah. Thank you so much for enlightening us. Yeah, it's really a lot that we have learned this evening. Any other question from the audience? No, I don't see any hands there.
Feel free to wrap it up. It's you.
Sorry? Yeah. No, so thank you so much. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and thank you for the insights, and thank you for the voice that you are out there challenging all these laws that come up, speaking on behalf of the voiceless, and also enlightening us here to know what's happening and how we all can contribute. And I hope every one of us here going home will have to be following what's going on in Poland, and we can contribute in our different capacities in making the change that we need to see in the world, whether it's supporting an organization that fights for women's rights in Poland or wherever in the world, because it's the same rights that women are fighting for everywhere. So thank you so much for being a part of this conversation this evening. It's really been an enriching experience. And thank you everyone for coming here tonight, the ones that have been tuning in. And thank you, Michael. I don't know if you want to give your last remarks and on what is coming up next Friday or so. So thank you.
Thank you very. It was refreshing to sit in the crowd and actually watch for once. And thank you, Malgorzata, for coming up. And your mind is brilliant, and the things you know. It was just fascinating to listen to you go into depth in this topic, and I'm so glad I am not the one sitting at the other end of the table to have this conversation, which is obviously, these are things I did not even know of myself, and it's so good to be enlightened and to be to gain some new insights and knowledge, and I hope everybody, feel more rejuvenated or refreshed in terms of how much was said concerning what's going on in Poland and what's going on the world over. Some of this information, like I said, I never knew about. So thank you very much for coming out. To everybody watching from home, you can probably hear my voice right now, and to people listening on the stream, I said that because this conversation is going to be on Spotify and Apple and SoundCloud in a couple of weeks, so stay tuned. This is the last episode of Meeting of the Minds for the year, actually, and it's a beautiful way to actually close the season of this platform. But as mentioned earlier, if you or anyone have any topics you would like to cover, or anyone you would like to invite and have a conversation with, feel free to send a message to us on Slam Poetry Bergen on Facebook and on Instagram, or just send an email to slampoetrybergen@gmail.com or MoftMinds@gmail.com or michael@lithusbadigan.no. Next Friday, the Spotify streams open, and we're going to be open with a conversation we had with T. Michael. Looking forward to listening to that in retrospect, actually. And the revolution involves everybody. We can always talk about a change in society and just talk about it. You have to also be present, and you also have to be part of moving the paradigm shift, or towards a paradigm shift anyways. Thank you very much for everyone for coming out. I go by the name of Michael O'Para, and I hope next time my next moderator can just close the events themselves, and I don't have to do it from here. But we love you, Dora. It's the first time we're trying this out. Thank you guys for coming out. Appreciate it. Have a nice weekend and stay blessed. Bye-bye.